Welcome to Yellowstone National Park. Over 4 million people visit the park each year. They come to see the unique and beautiful natural features, such as geysers, hot springs, and cascading waterfalls, as well as the variety of wildlife, including bear, bison, elk, and wolves. How many of these visitors realize that the park they visit today could have been very different from what they see? It is possible that the park may not have existed. Hi, this is the Wyoming Traveler, and I want to tell you how the U.S. Army saved Yellowstone. Not this army, this army. In telling this story and understanding how this occurred, we must first start at the beginning of Yellowstone Park. Congress in 1872 established and President U.S. Grant signed into law the world's first ever national park, Yellowstone. Congress, however, had no idea how to manage a park. All the law did was prevent individuals from claiming legal ownership to any of the 3,500 square miles making up the national park. Nathaniel Lanford was appointed the first superintendent of Yellowstone Park. He served from 1872 to 1877. He did not receive a salary, he had no staff, nor was he given any money to manage the park. In fact, during his 5 years as superintendent, he only went to the park twice. Lanford was replaced by Philetus Norris. Norris was superintendent from 1877 to 1882. He had a better situation than Lanford. Norris was given a salary, which allowed him to live at the park. He also had funds which enabled him to hire an assistant, provide limited park development, and furnish some protection for the wildlife and natural features. This money, however, was far from adequate, and Norris had no legal means to prosecute any offenders. He was successful, however, in laying out the park's road system and constructing trails. Norris was removed as superintendent in 1882. Between 1882 and 1886, the park had a series of ineffective superintendents and was in serious danger. Natural features were vandalized, the wildlife was poached, there was no control over concessions, and squatters were settling in the park. The rampant poaching endangered bison, elk, deer, and other animals. Timber cutting and grazing left large areas of land devastated. Fires set by settlers destroyed acres of forest. Vandals signed their name on geyser formations and cut fragile pieces of ornate travertine. In 1885, the railroad, in the form of the Yellowstone Improvement Company, was pressuring Congress to allow them to build a railroad in the park and sell land to developers. Into this controversy came General Phil Sheridan of Civil War fame. General Sheridan supported Yellowstone from the very beginning. He authorized military escorts for the two explorations of Yellowstone in 1870 and 1871. The general visited the park in 1882 and was appalled at what he saw. When he returned to Washington, D.C., he, along with Senator George Vest, began to lobby Congress for greater protection of the park. The two men, along with other conservationists, pushed Congress to do four things: expand the size of the park, place the park under military control, reduce development in the park, and prohibit concessions near major park attractions. Except for expanding the size of the park, they were successful in accomplishing all these goals, and Yellowstone Park was transferred from the Interior Department to the War Department. In 1886, a company from the 1st U.S. Cavalry Regiment arrived at Mammoth Hot Springs and established Camp Sheridan. The Army's mission in the park was to protect natural features from vandals, protect wildlife from poachers, suppress fires, remove squatters, and regulate concessions. The Army was successful in accomplishing all of these goals. By today's standards, its methods would be considered harsh, as there were no legal punishment against violators. Offenders, be they vandals or poachers, could not be prosecuted because there were no laws making vandalism or poaching illegal in the park. The Army, however, was not helpless. Offenders had their property confiscated by the military, and they were placed in the guardhouse until the Army commander, now the park superintendent, decided to release them. Upon release, they were expelled from the park. Conservationists were aware of the Army's efforts in protecting the park and the lack of legal framework to prosecute offenders. As a result, these groups began to pressure Congress to pass laws making poaching or defacing natural features in the park illegal. Their efforts resulted in the passage of the Lacey Act, which made destroying plants, wildlife, or vandalizing natural features illegal. The Army was also able to prevent a concessionaire from building an elevator which was designed to transport tourists to the bottom of the lower falls. After a couple of years, it was evident the Army was going to be managing the park for some time, and facilities at Camp Sheridan needed to be improved. The construction of what was to be called Fort Yellowstone began. The first stage of construction at Fort Yellowstone started in 1891 and lasted until 1907. Among the structures built during this period were a guardhouse, an administrative office, barracks for the soldiers, NCO family quarters, and officer family quarters. These buildings were of wood construction. However, most are still standing and today serve as homes and offices for park staff. As the role of the Army increased and the size of the garrison grew, a second stage of construction was needed. This construction was started in 1908 and ended in 1913. These structures were built mostly of stone and included a 3-story barracks, a bachelor officers' quarters, additional officer family quarters, and a new guardhouse. All these structures, as with the earlier ones, now serve as home and offices for the Park Service. In addition to the fort, patrol cabins were established throughout the park to provide shelter for troops, protecting the natural features in the summer, and for winter patrols tracking poachers. From these outposts, soldiers patrolled the park by horse in the summer and on skis during the winter, staying in patrol cabins along the way. Most of these cabins no longer exist. 2, however, still do. One, near the Norris Campground, now houses the Museum of the National Ranger. The other, the Beckler River Soldier Station, still functions as a ranger station. The Army was also responsible for building and improving the roads and bridges developed by Norris within the park. Captain Hiram Chiddington of the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers was the senior engineer in Yellowstone from 1899 to 1906. He was responsible for much of the construction at the fort and throughout the park during this time. Some of the structures constructed under his supervision were the Roosevelt Arch, the Chiddington Bridge over the Yellowstone River, the Sylvan Pass Road, and the Golden Gate Viaduct. Engineering was not Captain Chiddington's only accomplishment for the park. He also wrote an extensive guidebook about Yellowstone, which is still in publication. Congress in 1916 created the National Park Service for the purpose of managing and administrating the many parks now within the United States. The formation of this agency and the possibility of U.S. involvement in World War I meant the Army was no longer needed or able to care for the nation's parks. In 1918, the Army turned over administration of the Yellowstone National Park to the new Park Service, ending 3 decades of management and protection. In this time, the Army set in motion policies and procedures that would serve as a model for park management for the first half of the 20th century. The legacy of the Army's role in the national parks can be seen today in the uniform of the park rangers, especially the classic campaign hat. Today, when you enjoy the sights and sounds of Yellowstone, say a quiet thank you to the United States Army.